Hello everyone, let me first introduce myself. I am Manvi John and I thought of creating a crash course for Ruby on Rails for absolute beginners. And if you are a kind of guy who want to learn Rails and you have no knowledge what Ruby is, what Rails is and where to get started, you are at the right place. So in this crash course, I'll be taking you through 10 days sessions. Each session will be maximum of 30 minutes, and in each session, I'll be building a small blog app from scratch, and it needs no knowledge about Ruby or Rails. And I'm gonna be building it step by step so that you understand it each and every line of code. So let's get started. Before we can start working on Rails, you need to have some sort of software installed in your PC or laptop. So the first thing you would need is a beautiful text editor. Sublime Text Notepad++ is is good, but in my personal opinion, you can try this out. This is called Visual Studio Code, and in my opinion, this is the best text editor for any kind of web development. And next thing is you have to install Rails itself. Rails is not so much easy that can be installed in your computer. It needs Ruby and other such some kind of software. So to get your life easy installing Rails, I would suggest you this particular website. They have done a wonderful job, and you can go down, find your platform and download the particular version you want. I would prefer Rails 2. Sorry, Ruby 2.2 and Rails 5.0. And this is just a setup file. You can run it and you can get Rails installed in your computer. If you have some issues or if you have some trouble in installing, I would leave you some kind of links to the videos which show you some step-by-step ways of installing Rails in your computer. If that's done, let's get started. So before we dive into the app, I would like to show you some slides, not so long, little bit. And the first thing that everyone would have is what is Rails. So Rails is a framework. So what is a framework? Framework is nothing but a group of organized code which are pre-written so that you can write on you using those code and get your job done quicker and easily. There's no need that you have to reinvent the wheel and write something again. Most of the things are already pre-written. You have to use those code to write your own application. So that's called a framework, and Rails is also such kind of framework. And to be more precise, it's a Ruby gem. So what's Ruby? Ruby is nothing but a language, and it was developed during the 90s, and it's more popular because of this particular framework called Rails. And as you know, Rails is one of the most popular framework and is used by most of the biggest companies like Twitter, Hulu, and all those big industries peoples. And the next thing is that the Rails principle, what Rails is basically based on. The first thing is try or nothing but don't repeat yourself. This means that once you write a line of code, prevent yourself or restrict yourself from writing it again. And Rails does this out of the box. There is no need that you have to put yourself into situations like you should not repeat this. Rails does that for you. You can while we are developing this app, you will find that we write a particular amount of code once and we're reusing it in more than one place. The next thing is called convention or configurations. It's nothing but it's that Rails gives you some kind of convention over configurations. Configurations are nothing but file names and folder names. So for example, let me show you some table. Here you have a table in the database called posts. Posts are nothing but something like blog posts, and the Rails convention says that the table name should be of a plural form like posts or books or sections. And if you go inside the table, you would find many records, and each record should be of a singular form of that. For example, post. If you have a record inside a books table, each record will be called book. So that's called a convention over the configuration. And the next thing is called the MVC pattern. So what is MVC? MVC is nothing but a software design pattern, which I will show you here. This is nothing but, suppose you imagine yourself as this particular user using the computer and you send a request and that request is sent to something called a controller. A controller is nothing but a kind of an object or a class which handles those requests. And those requests, if it's necessary, those requests are redirected to the database and some kind of data is fetched, and the data handling is done by something called model. This model is nothing but a class which interacts with the actual database. The controller don't interact with the database, or the user never interacts with the database. It is the model which interacts with the database and fetches some data and gives it back to the controller. And what the controller does with the data what the controller has got, it will use those data to render a view. What's a view? A view is nothing but a kind of an HTML document or some kind of images which you see as a response, which is sent back to you who sent the request. So this is the pattern. You send a request and it's redirected to the controller, and the controller, if needed, consults the model, and the model in turn consults the database and fetches some data and puts it back to the controller, and the controller uses those data to create a new view or HTML document with necessary data and pushes it back as a response. So this is the pattern, and Rails is completely based on this pattern. We will be knowing each and every class and the uses of these objects in our app in everyday session. So let's get started. And once you have installed Rails successfully, you have to go to your C drive, and there you will find a folder called sites. You have to go inside the folder and open command prompt in that particular folder. And now you have to type a command called Rails space new space the app name. So here we're going to create a new app called blog. And now what this says is that it says Rails create a new app with all necessary files. So hit enter. Now Rails creates all kind of necessary file for the application, and it says something called run bundle install. I would prefer you at this point of time hit Ctrl C and break the command. Now I would tell you the reason why we broke out of the Rails command. So for that, go into the folder by typing in cd and open that folder in your favorite text editor. And there you would find a file called gem file. So what is this gem file? This gem file is nothing but a set of gems which the Rails and the Ruby request to run your app. So let me tell you what a gem is. In Java we would call a collection of class a package. In C# we would call a collection of class an assembly. Here we call a collection of class as a gem in Ruby. Here, as you can see, the first gem getting installed is Rails itself. As I said, Rails is itself a gem which runs on Ruby, so it's necessary. And why we broke out of the command is that your gem won't be probably get installed, because here you can see something called source. Here it's using something like HTTPS, which would be most probably giving you an error due to SSL certificates, which is out of the scope of this course. But to get it work, just remove that S and make it HTTP and rubygems.org, and save the file and go ahead and now run bundle install. So we broke out of the command when it was running bundle install, and we made some changes to the gem file and we are running it back bundle install. So what this bundle install does, it goes to rubygems.org and fetches all the necessary gems and installs it so that you can develop your app. So it would take some time for installing your app, your gems. And mine took about 30 seconds to complete, and it would depend based on your internet speed. And once that's done, great, that's it. You have a working Rails app. Now let me quickly go into that particular gem file and tell you what are the necessity of each gem. So this gem is for the actual Rails. To run Rails, you need the Rails gem. The next thing is called SQLite. By default, Rails uses a database called SQLite, which is kind of a database which uses file to store data. And there is no need that you need to install external databases like MySQL, Oracle. If you have Rails installed, it will use something called SQLite, which requires no database. It will store your data in a file. So that's the need of that particular gem. The next gem is called Sass Rails. What is Sass? A Sass is also a kind of a CSS preprocessor. For time being, you don't get your head wrong. I would say it is also CSS. So just remember it's CSS. And Uglifier is a kind of a gem which compresses your CSS and JavaScript, which you will see it later. And this Coffee Rails, I would say you won't need this Coffee Rails. Coffee Rails is also a kind of JavaScript, but we won't be using it, so we can remove that out of the gem file. And then jQuery Rails is nothing but the jQuery. You know the jQuery plugin. If you know, it's okay, but if you are not aware, there's no problem. jQuery is a kind of JavaScript library which gets installed by default. Okay, now if you have made some changes to the gem file by adding or removing something from your gem file, you need to again run bundle install. So that's the thumb rule. That's why I made a change and then rerun the bundle install. If you make some changes to the gem file, remove something or add something, you have to run the bundle install again. Okay, that's fine. Now let's close the gem file. Now, okay, how we run our Rails app? I would say it's very much simple. What you have to do is open a fresh command prompt and type in space s, which means Rails server, and this would boot up the Rails web server. It comes with something called a WebRick server in which the Rails application runs. Once the server runs, you have to go to the URL called localhost colon 3000, as it says here. Localhost colon 3000. Copy the link, go to your browser, type it in and hit enter. And it would say welcome aboard, you are riding on Ruby on Rails. Give a tap on your back, you are good on your way to start writing and Ruby on Rails. You have installed the Ruby on Rails without any problem in your PC, so that's a good sign. So with that done, let's go on to our next target. In today's lesson, we will be learning how to create a new app, which we have already done, and then we will be seeing something called routing, and then naming routes and creating links with helper methods. So what is routing? Routing is nothing but giving requests to the controller. That's called routing. What are the possible requests that you can give to the controller is called routes. So how do you specify routes? It's simple. You can specify routes by typing it in the URL. If I say localhost/home, it's actually a route. It's gonna give some request to the web server, and that is called a routing. As you can see here, it says routing error, no routes match get/homes, which means we have no routing specified that if this request comes, do something. So routing is nothing but a URL that says something to the Rails framework. So what it would say to the Rails framework? Suppose if I give home, it would say what is the controller to be called, or what is the controller to be used by the Rails. And in turn, the controller will access the model if necessary and give you back some kind of a HTML document. So as you saw in the MVC pattern, that's the whole pattern that goes on. You give some request to the controller goes and asks the model if there is kind of data it can give back. If so, it will get those data and give you back an HTML document. So the starting point is a request, and the request goes in form of this routing. So to create a route, what you have to do is go to your Rails app, and there inside the config folder you'd find something called routes.rb. So here you see plenty amount of crap of comments saying lot of things. Just remove those comments. I would get you through this step by step. Once I remove those comments, let's write our first route. Okay, so our first route is that you have to say if I give /home, I just need to do something. So let's say get. So what this get specifies? This get specifies whenever I get a get request. As I hope you may know what a get request is in web development, in websites. A get request is like a request which is sent through the URL and not through the HTML body. So the first thing is the HTTP method. It can be a post, it can be a get request, or it can be a delete request. There are many types of HTTP requests, but today I am concentrating on something called a get request. Then I need to give what is the pattern, or what's the URL that the user need to give to satisfy this route. I would say /home. So as you know, I have typed here /home. It said there is no route, so I'm going to create a route for it. So I'm going to say if I get /home request, what I need to do, I need to give this to something called a controller. So what's the controller? I can specify the controller as a home controller, and then I have to give a hash and give something called welcome. So wait a minute, I hope you are getting confused. So what is this to and what is this home hash welcome? So as I said, I'm giving a request as /homes. So I'm saying Rails, you have to call or use the controller named home, and this to means that I am giving this to a controller called home. Then what's this hash welcome? This hash is nothing but a separator. It separates the controller and the action. So what's an action? An action is nothing but a method inside the controller. As I said, a controller is a class. It's a Ruby class. Inside a class you will have a number of methods. So you are calling a method inside a class called welcome. So I'm using the controller called home, and I'm calling a method inside the home controller called welcome. So now with that specified, let me save the route and let me go and let me give the request again /home. Okay, right. So now we have again an error, but this time it's a different error. It says uninitialized constant home controller. So what does this mean? As I said, I have told the Rails framework that if I get a request class /home in the URL, I have to take this request to a home controller and a method welcome in the home controller. But I never said to Rails that this is the controller. I mean, we have not created any kind of controller right now. So there is no controller that Rails can use. So how to create a controller? For that, you have to go back to the command prompt and type in a command called Rails generate. Generate is nothing but a command which allows you to create a number of files like controllers, models, and stuff like that. We will be using this command often. So Rails generate, I'm gonna generate a controller, and the controller name is gonna be called home controller. So here the convention is just give the name of the controller. It's called home. So and the name of the controller should start with a caps. So these are called convention over configuration. You have to give particular name of the files in particular format. So that's what Rails follows. So I'm going to create a controller, and the controller name is home. So then hit enter. Okay, right, now we have a controller created at a path called app controllers home controls.rb. So now let me go to the app folder. You will see something called controllers. Inside that you will see something called home controller. Here you can see, as I said, home controller is nothing but a Ruby class which is inheriting from a class called application controller, which you can find here. An application controller which is written in the Rails framework. You need not to worry about that. You just worry about home controller, which is inheriting from application controller. Here we can define a number of methods, as in our case it's called welcome. In Ruby, you create a method using the def keyword, method name, and followed by end. So we have a class for the controller and we have a method in the class called def welcome. So that's it. You have created a controller, you have defined an action and nothing but a method which can handle this particular route. So now let me go ahead to the app and reload the page. So let's see if we are free from error now. Now there's an error again, but this time it's a different error. So what does this error means? Template is missing. So what is a template? A template is nothing but a HTML document which the Rails can throw back at you. Now I said in the MVC pattern, a request is sent through the route and that request is handled by the controller. In our case it's the home controller, and it runs a method called welcome. Okay, now the controller has to give back a response, right? We are not receiving any kind of response or an HTML document. So that's what this error means. It says sorry, I'm not getting a response from the controller, so what can I show to you? So how to give back a response? So for that, in the app folder you will see a folder called views. What this folder view means? This view folder has all kind of HTML document which your app uses. In the views folder you can see there is a folder called home automatically created. This folder was created when I ran the command called Rails generate controller home. Here you can see I have created a folder in the app views home. So what does this mean is, whenever this controller is called, some kind of HTML document from this home folder is gonna be used. So this is called convention over configuration. So whenever a controller named X is getting called by the Rails and a method called some Y is used in that class called X, then Rails will come over to the views folder and see for some kind of folder called X. In our case it's home folder, since our controller is called home controller. Now our controller has a method called welcome. So here inside the home folder, our Rails application would look for a document called welcome.html.erb. So what does this ERB means? It's nothing but embedded Ruby. It means that you can write Ruby code inside an HTML document. Okay, so now let me tell you the convention again. We have a controller called home controller. Then in the views folder you will have a folder with the same name as the controller, in our case home. And then if you have a method called def welcome and the response which is sent back is a file, a HTML file with the same name as the method called welcome.html.erb. So now here in the welcome, if I type the welcome page and save that and go ahead and reload the page, voila, we have a welcome page and a page which is working. Now you can see I gave a request through a route called /home, and that route took it to the home controller here which we created and called a method welcome on it, and that method welcome gave back a response which is a HTML document welcome.html.erb, and that was shown as an output in the browser window. So that's the concept. That's the whole concept in Rails. And a little more thing is that, suppose if I want to show some kind of output in this HTML file, I can use the Ruby language in this. That's called embedded Ruby. So what's embedded Ruby here? Embedded Ruby is nothing but writing Ruby code in the HTML document, and writing Ruby code in the HTML document is done using this this kind of weird angle bracket, percentage, percentage, closing angle bracket. Here you can type any kind of Ruby code. So let me type 5 plus 5 and save. And now if I reload the page, you would not see any kind of difference, because here the 5 plus 5 is done, but it's not shown in the page. If you want something which is calculated or done in the Ruby to be shown on the web page, you need to add the equal symbol after the percentage. So now if I reload the page, you would see 10 there. So the thumb rule is that if I use something like an equal to in the embedded Ruby angle brackets, I would see the output in the page. If I don't use the equal to symbol, I won't be seeing any kind of output in the browser page. So that's the key concept. So hope you understood that. With that said, the next thing is something called instant variables. This is one of the most powerful feature of Rails. This allows you to pass some data from the controller to the views. As I said, the controller goes to the model and asks for data. If the model gives the data, then the controller will use the data to do something on the view, to show something on the view. So some data should be passed from the controller to the view. So for that we need to use a variable which starts with at. Here in Ruby, these variables are called instance variables. So for example, let me say at message, hello, this is Amir. So let me say that, and now if I go back to the welcome page and welcome, now if I type in inside the embedded Ruby tags at message, so you see I have an equal symbol inside the embedded Ruby tag, which means I'm gonna output this to the browser window. So now if I reload the page, let's see, welcome, hello, this is Amir. So you see the data is getting passed from the controller to the view with the variable starting with at. So that's the concept. So you can pass some variables or data from the controller to the HTML document through the instance variables, or something called, you can call this a variable starting with that. Okay, now I'm passing a string now. Suppose if I'm passing a kind of an array, suppose let's consider I'm asking the controller to give me back a set of data. So we will be returning back it as an array. So how to handle an array in Ruby? So for that, let me say I have an array here which is going to be sent to the view one. Let me call it as an idli dosa puri. Okay, now if I go to the welcome, and now I'm gonna type some Ruby code here. I have an array here. I'm gonna call a method called each. This each is nothing but it iterates through each element in the loop, and each element is returned here as something like an item here. So I'll explain you at the end of this end. Okay, now what it does is it takes the array, takes each element from it. This is called the each iterator. It takes each element from it and stores in this item, and this goes on. So I can access this item over here, and I can output this item in the browser window. So we can make this even pretty by typing in an unordered list and putting this item inside a list item. So what happens is that this array creates a list item for every item in this array. So now if I go ahead and reload the page, you'd see idli, dosa and puri as an unordered list. So this is how you should use the embedded Ruby inside a view. So you can pass in the data from the controller to the view using the instant variables. Okay, now with that said, The next thing we're gonna learn is something called naming routes. Okay, so before that, let me create another method here in the home controller called def about end. Okay, now I'm gonna create a page here called about.html.erb. Remember that we are handling this in the home controller, and we are going to call a method called about, and so it's gonna be using the document in home and the document name is about. Before using this, we need to specify the route. So you have to go ahead and type in the route for this, and here I'm gonna call the about page, so I'm gonna call slash about in the URL, and I'm gonna call the home controller, but this time I'm gonna call the about method about. Okay, in the about.html I'm gonna type in about page. Okay, now if I go ahead, type in about, sorry, about dot, sorry, I have misspelled the name, should be html.erb, right? So make sure that you give the file names correctly, because Rails uses convention or configuration, so it expects some file names to be as such. So now we have the about page working, now I have the home page working. Now I need some kind of navigation so that I can switch between the home page and the about page easily. So for that, what we're gonna use, we'll be using as normal anchor tags, right? So if I go to the welcome page, and at the top if I type in an anchor tag, I'm gonna give the reference as about slash about, and I'm gonna say about page. Okay, this is a link or something like about. Okay, and I'm gonna use the same link, go to the about page and paste the same link over there, and this time I'm gonna go from the about page to the home page, and I'm gonna call it as home. And now if I reload the page, I would see about over here. If I click about, it goes to the about page. If I click home, it goes to the home page. However, this is a very bad practice to be used in Rails. You should not be using routes or links directly as such in the Rails. Why? You would be learning this soon in the upcoming sessions. So for time being, what's the best practice? Let me tell you. This is done by something called naming the routes. So what is naming the routes? So for naming the routes, you have to go to the routes, and here we have two arguments. The first argument is the actual URL. The second argument is the controller and the action to be done when this URL is given. The third argument is called as. So you can see these are like hashes like key value pair, two to this home controller and this welcome action. So this as means giving a name to this route. So I'm gonna call this as home. So this route in my name is home. So what this is gonna do something special. What this is gonna do? So this is gonna do something special in my view. In my view, it's gonna create a variable which is called by the name of the route. So sorry, the name of the route which I gave home, and an underscore path. So now, as you see in the routes, as I called it as home, Rails will create me a variable in my view called home underscore path. So if I name this as something like page, then I would have a variable here called page underscore path, but that's not meaningful. So let me change it back to home. So the thumb rule is that if you give a name here, then you can access it as a variable with home, the name underscore path. It would give the route's path in the view. So now let me reload the page. sorry, I'm actually mm, okay. The problem here is that here you should give it as a symbol. A symbol is nothing but a string, but without any single quotes. The string should start with a colon. So here, as you can see, colon as here, you should also give it as colon home. So if I go back and reload, here you can see slash home. Okay, I can break through that, so you can see better. You can see we have an output called slash home. So that's it. So if you give a name in the routes file with the parameter as and colon home or something like that, you can access it in the views using this the same name underscore path. So what I can do is can go to the routes and give both a name. So I'm gonna call this as above. Okay, so that's more meaningful. Can go to the welcome page, and now I can replace this by equal percent and say home path, sorry, about path underscore path. Save that. I can go to about. Here I can do the same, which equals home path. Now if I save, if I reload the page, here I go to about, click, goes to the about page. If I go to home, it go to the home page. Now if I go and inspect element, I could see it is being replaced by slash above. That is, the embedded Ruby tag is replaced by the path we wanted. So now if I go to about, home, it's fine. So one of the biggest advantage of naming the route is this. Suppose in the future I feel that okay, I'm not good with this something like slash home. I like to call it as welcome itself, and this about I'm gonna call it as about us. Now suppose if you are given the absolute path here in the views, you have to go ahead and change this to, because you have changed it in the route, otherwise your links would break. But the problem is, this is a small app, you would have it in a single place, but in a big project you would have it in a multiple place and you would have multiple links, so changing in each place is impossible. So by naming routes, you have given this a constant name and referring the name in many views. So if you change the value of this name, there is no need to change the name. You are just referring the name, so it will be automatically changed in all views without any problem. So if I go home and go and type in here welcome, I'll get the same page. If I click about, it goes to about us. If I click home, it goes to welcome. Suppose if I have given it as a constant home controller about, or let me go to welcome, and if I have, instead of giving it as an about path or something like that, if I have given it as slash about, and if I click about, this is gonna break because there is no route called about. So I have changed the route here. So that's the matter. So if I refer the routes in the views using a name, it's not gonna break in the future. So that's what a good practice is. Okay, so now let me get back the routes. So that still works, it still works. Okay, so that's how we do. But we have still a single problem. That is, it's difficult to write every link in your document as a href equals double quotes and go with an embedded Ruby tag and type in something like that. So it's actually a bad practice doing it in a large scale, and it's also will take a lot of time to code this. So how we get rid of this? That's where something called helper methods come in. That's what we're gonna say next. This is called creating links with helper methods. So what is a helper method is? A helper method is nothing but a method which you can use in views to create normal HTML elements using Ruby functions. Something like this I'm going to show now is something called a link method. So type in the Ruby tag equal, which is gonna output the show the output in the page. And here I'm gonna use a Ruby method called link to, and this method is defined in the Rails framework. There is no need to for you to define this method. So this is one of the powerful method. Here you type in link to, and it takes the first argument as what is to be displayed in the link. Here we have displayed is about, right? So I can type in here about and separate and comma, and where I need to redirect. I need to take them to a particular page or a particular path. So I'm gonna take them now to the about page. So I'm gonna type /about. So that's it. Now if I go ahead and type in an horizontal line so that you can see. Now if I reload the page, you can see two about, both are links, both are hyperlink. If I go on inspect element this, I'm gonna still see it's a hyperreference. It's also an anchor tag, both are anchor tag, but the second anchor tag is not generated by you. It was generated by Rails using this method called link to method. A link to method is nothing but a method which gives you an anchor tag with the h reference as this one and the about in the place where we put this about. So that's simple. So now what's the use of this? Now as I said, you should not give the absolute path in the link tags. Instead of that, you need to give the name of the route. Here I am going to give the route as about path. So now if you see, I have a link to the about, and the path I need to redirect is something called about path. Now if I go and reload, see to about, if I click about, it's gonna take me to the about. The first about is also gonna take me to the about page. But what is special with this about is it's generated using something called helper methods in Ruby. There are a lot of helper methods, and we'll be learning it step by step in the upcoming sessions. So for time being, the thumb rule is whenever you're gonna write a link to another page, it's better that you use this Ruby or Rails helper method which generates an anchor tag for you. And this anchor tag has the text as the first argument and the hyperreference as the second argument, and this second argument is better to be a name of the route. So how you name a route? You go to the routes page and you give the third argument as as and the home. So that's simple. And I hope for the today's session whatever we have learned is that how you go ahead, create a new Rails app, go ahead, create a new controller, and in our case we created a home controller, and we had discussion about how we can handle the data from the controller to the views using the instance variables. And then we also learned something about giving some routes in the routes file, and also naming the routes, and also linking the pages using the link tags. And then we replace the link tags with the helper methods in Rails, which is more preferred, and using the named routes instead of the direct routes in the link tags. So that's it for today's session. We will be covering more on controllers and models, and we will be going towards our blog app even more further tomorrow. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, and if you are not subscribed till now, go ahead and subscribe. Thank you.